MLB has one of the biggest issues in all of sports, and it's this little motion right here, which can be done by any umpire at any point in any game. This motion, as I'm sure we all know, ejects a player, meaning they are forced to leave the game and can no longer play or sit in the dugout. Obviously, this can be a huge disadvantage for the team losing a player, especially if the player happens to be a superstar, or even worse, a starting pitcher early in the game. So, obviously there are set ejection rules, right? Wrong. We've seen multiple players ejected for countless reasons that seem a little ridiculous, and sometimes umpires are just having a bad day and start throwing people out. Like this one ejection to Bryce Harper that happened a few weeks ago, where he seemed to be calmly talking to the umpire before getting thrown out of the game. However, there are much worse ejections in MLB history. You can get ejected for literally anything at any point. You can get ejected on the second pitch of a game. You can get ejected while walking away from the umpire. You can get ejected without saying a single word. You can get ejected because the umpire doesn't like the way you tried to receive the ball from his hands. Umpires basically have ultimate power in this situation, and many times it's used in a way that is obviously not intended by Major League Baseball. Not only does this ruin games on the field, but it can also completely destroy fan experience. If you only have the money to go to one game a year and your kid's favorite player is Bryce Harper, and then he is ejected 15 minutes into the game, that can be heartbreaking for a child. Oh, and even fans aren't safe from the ejection hammer, because they too can be thrown out of a game if they're acting too unruly. And of course, this is just according to the umpire with zero review or with any other person stepping in. It's just one man's opinion. Let's talk about how one single motion is ruining Major League Baseball. In 1989, MLB changed the rules to allow ejections to be something that an umpire could do, due to players getting too unruly and not really having a way to control them other than fining the players. The first player ejected ever in a Major League Baseball game was Dave Orr after screaming at the third base umpire. One day in 1984, the record amount of ejections happened in a single day, where 18 people were ejected in just one calendar day. This is because 17 people were ejected in one single game after a brawl that obviously got a lot of players thrown out. There have been over 20 ejections in the World Series, although none over the past 28 years. Imagine getting tossed in probably the biggest game of your life in the last series of the season because of arguing a call that the umpire was probably wrong about in the first place. Absolutely crazy stuff. But we don't really care about the history of ejections. We all know what they are. Let's look at some of the single worst ejections that have ever happened in Major League Baseball history to really understand just how bad some of these ejections are. Also, subscribe to my channel because I'm skipping the history lesson and getting straight into the good stuff. So thanks, and subscribe to thank me. Players consistently get ejected for throwing their equipment on the ground. Normally you're allowed to do that, but if the umpire knows that they made a bad call earlier in an at-bat that resulted in an out, sometimes the umpire thinks that the slammed equipment is really frustration with a bad call by the umpire. With that being said, of course sometimes a player may scream a profanity while slamming their stuff down, but we don't always know these things since there's not always hot mics to allow us to hear the conversations happening on the field. Do you guys remember when Hall of Famer Adrian Beltre was ejected because he didn't want to stand on the on-deck circle that he thought was too close to the plate, and he didn't want to get hit with a foul ball? One of the biggest selling points of going to that game was because Adrian was just a few hits away from 3,000 career hits, which is obviously an extremely big deal. So fans were showing up like crazy that week to try to watch some history in person. However, they were robbed of that chance because an umpire got extremely hurt that Beltre didn't exactly listen to what he said. Beltre was very sarcastically moving the on-deck circle and was 100% trying to somewhat show up the umpire, but given the situation and the fact that nothing was malicious and it was obviously just a joke, for a player that absolutely loved to joke around on the field, was Beltre really justified to get ejected here? I don't think so at all, but maybe you disagree. Let me know in the comments section. One ejection that I can surely say is completely unjustified is JT Realmuto getting ejected in a spring training game after asking for a new baseball. However, the umpire took a few extra seconds and JT pulled away his glove, and then the ball fell out onto the ground. Unfortunately, the umpire woke up on the wrong side of the bed and decided that JT was trying to show him up, which very obviously he was not. Another absolutely ridiculous ejection was when Christian Walker and his dugout was slightly unhappy with a check swing call early in an at-bat. A few pitches later, an actual check swing was called, so the call was a ball. Celebrating the fact that his teammate is now in a better count, Walker lightly clapped. However, I don't know what the umpire could have possibly thought, but clearly he thought Walker was showing him up. So he ejected him while he was in the dugout, which absolutely shocked Walker. Aaron Boone, the Yankees manager, absolutely loves to get ejected constantly. Like, at least a few times a month. He just has to get ejected, or I don't know, who knows, he just needs to. It's the only way. However, one time he was barking at the umpire. The umpire then said, if you say another word, you're gone. So he just didn't speak anymore. However, a fan above him did, and that was enough for the umpire to think that someone in the Yankees dugout was yelling at the umpire. So he ejected Aaron Boone, even though after the game he said he didn't think Boone was the one that was actually talking, but he didn't want to eject a player from the game. A slightly older but still just as ridiculous ejection came back when John Lackey was making his first start in over 6 weeks after coming back from the injured list. His first pitch went behind Ian Kinsler. His second pitch drilled Kinsler in the ribs. However, this was obviously unintentional because it was his first start and only 2 pitches in, so obviously he was just lacking a little control. Not to the umpire, however, as Lackey was thrown out of the game as he deemed it was intentional without any warnings. After the game, Lackey said he was still stunned and he said he was trying to pitch inside. But because he was amped up since it was his first start, he lost some control and unintentionally drilled Kinsler. And like, if you understand baseball at all, which clearly this umpire did not, you will know that this was as unintentional as it gets. Well, maybe slightly more intentional than this one. Orioles pitcher Kevin Gausman was ejected after throwing a slow looping curveball that drilled Xander Bogaerts right in the thigh. This was a very slow curveball and obviously was not the pitch to get retaliation on. Probably didn't even hurt Bogaerts. However, the umpire once again deemed this intentional and threw Gausman out of the game, which is truly insane. This does at least have some reasoning behind it, however, because this is soon after Manny Machado, who was an Oriole at the time, slid into Dustin Pedroia and ended up injuring him. So Matt Barnes threw at Machado's head, and then Chris Sale threw inside on Machado multiple times. And because this was right after those games and these were the same teams, there were warnings prior to this game handed out. However, this was obviously not intentional, so the warning should not have mattered in this situation because you still are only supposed to eject a player if it's obviously intentional. And like I said prior, clearly this was not intentional. I have one more Red Sox ejection that I really love. Alex Cora, the manager, went out to discuss a foul ball which he thought was a home run. After replay confirmed the ball was still foul, Cora wanted to know a little more about why the call remained a foul ball. The umpire told him and then asked if Cora wanted to get ejected to fire up his team. Cora said, "No, I don't want to get ejected for this," and then he got ejected anyway because the umpire thought he said he did want to be ejected. The look on Cora's face after he was thrown out is just priceless. We also have a few other great ejection moments where Justin Turner got ejected inside of the Dodgers dugout after saying hi to the umpire after he told him if he said one more word he would be tossed. Apparently, Justin saying hi was enough to set the umpire over the edge, which is just truly hilarious and shows how fragile some of these egos really are. And Anthony Rendon once got ejected after taking off his batting gloves, standing at home plate, and looking back at the umpire, then without saying one word, he got ejected for seemingly no reason. Obviously, there are many ejections that are more than justified. If a player intentionally throws at another player, or fights someone, or charges on the field to scream at the umpire, or whatever, there are many true reasons. but right now there just needs to be some changes to make these true reasons more, and the fake reasons, they just gotta go away. They can't be here anymore. The ump show needs to stop. It's not fair to the paying customers. While I talk about some of the ways to change how these umpires handle ejections, I'll throw a few more unjustified ejections onto the screen that I just didn't have time to talk about. But there are many more ejections that are worth the watch because of just how stupid they truly are. With that being said, how can MLB hold their umpires more accountable and truly make an ejection worth it instead of just an umpire having a short fuse and almost immediately ending someone's game without even hesitating? Well, how about we start by making the umpires come together before an official ejection is thrown out? So if a player starts yelling at an umpire, they will come together and decide if the player used enough bad words or said enough bad things to then get ejected. If it's an obvious offense, this can be a very quick solution and they just all go, "We saw it," and then he's done. He's ejected, that's that. However, for something like Beltre moving the on-deck circle, there's a good chance that the other 3 umpires on the field would be like, "You might be being a little too harsh for throwing out a player there considering the situation." This would definitely help some of the more ridiculous ejections that should have never happened in the first place. Another solution here could be the ability to challenge and overturn an ejection. In the Cora case, the umpire literally thought that Cora wanted to be ejected. So Cora should be able to challenge. MLB reviews the footage, and if they find that Cora didn't do anything substantial enough to be ejected, then the call is overturned and he gets to remain on the field. I think that this could really help some of the power trip umpires that ruin the game for fans that show up. Also, an umpire should never realistically be allowed to eject a fan. That should be handled by the stadium security and the officers in the crowd. An umpire is not a legal official and should not be allowed to act on a paying customer and take away their ability to witness something that they paid for with their own money. That's just my opinion on that. Let me know what you think about these solutions in the comments, and let me know what your favorite ridiculous ejection is. And finally, watch another video if you're interested. One will be on the screen right now.